have Stephana Ferrell, the reason you're all here today, our special guest. Stephana is an Orange County parent of two, the director of research and insight at Florida Freedom to Read Project. Caring deeply about academic freedom, freedom of speech, truth in education, equal access, Stephana started organizing with other like-minded parents after her district started breaking with policy to remove books in fall 2021. Within a few months, the organization was known nationally for its statewide school censorship tracking and leading to a movement to defend the freedom to read in Florida. We have been so pleased to get to know Stephana in recent months and meet a wonderful human being, and we are so happy to have her with us today. So please help me in welcoming Stephana.
Thank you, everyone. I'm very excited to be here, very honored to be here. I'm going to quickly, before I jump into the presentation, talk about some recent news. So on Sunday, a few days after the election, coincidentally, the Florida Department of Education released a list. It's a shocking list. It nearly doubled from the list that they posted last year of 733 books, I think, in total. And those are actually instances, not books. We can imagine, if one district the size of Orange County has a couple, 20, 30, 40 copies of a book, we're actually talking about a lot of books that they're admitting have been removed from our state in the last year in response to HB 1069. And as I'll get to here in a second, that list is completely inaccurate. They have not included books that have been internally removed. They have not included books that have been informally objected to via an email from a group. And they also haven't included books that were removed sometime in the last couple school years, but have sat off shelves pending a review. So the actual total, and it's from our work through public records, is around 4,500 last year. 4,500 books. I'm jumping a little bit ahead. So I'm going to go into who we are. If you're not familiar, just like Jocelyn said, we're a parent-led group. We're volunteers. We use the public records process to find out exactly how our laws have influenced what is on the shelf and what is being taught in our curriculum. It didn't start without a need. In 2021 is when we first saw parental rights becoming a discussion point. And unfortunately, we saw it happen in Orange County that we had a great policy in place, but somebody used a tactic of showing up at a board meeting, reading a book out of context, and pretty much immediately got the book removed. It didn't sit right with us, and within a few months, there were multiple districts where this was happening: Indian River County, Polk County, where they happen to have Moms for Liberty and Citizens Defending Freedom working against our school districts to build distrust in public education. And so we wanted to be a response to that. We wanted to offer what we had learned kind of on the fly, what it takes to file public records, to work with your district, not against your district, in preserving access to education. So as I said, we're over 4,500 instances in the last year. There's actually over 4,300 unique titles. So when there's that narrative of we're not banning books, you can still buy them online, you can still, get them at the public library. There are a lot of books where we're talking about the author's first or second collections. There are certain authors that have been completely attacked where, Stephen King, not that he's hurting for sales, but Stephen King has had 74 of his titles challenged in Clay County. Jodi Picoult has had nearly her whole entire collection that was available in Indian River and Seminole County taken out. So there are authors that have had they're bestsellers, they have great careers, but then there's authors you probably haven't heard of yet. And having their books available in school libraries, especially when they're writing for a student audience, can really make a difference in boosting their sales. Because I can tell you right now, my son, I didn't know he was going to like Dog Man and Cat Kid, but he found that book in his school library, and all of a sudden we own the entire collection, which is a lot of books. So, being able to find an author in a school library can really make a difference, especially to new authors. And with over 4,300 titles, unique titles, coming under question, there are a lot of authors that are hurt by this movement, and their books aren't available everywhere yet. And school libraries really serve as a place to really launch some careers. So the more of these books are removed, the more publishers are less, the more likely they are not going to publish books that feature certain topics, certain characters. So it's a really terrible, terrible movement. I also want to talk about the expanded prohibitions on unsolicited theories. So the Florida Department of Education, laws pass at the state level. The Florida Department of Education is tasked with putting those laws into policy. And what they've been doing is expanding those laws. So when the Parental Rights in Education bill passed, the Don't Say Gay bill in 2022, it said K through 3, we're going to, limit access to or classroom instruction on gender and sexual orientation. K through 3 and anywhere where it's not age appropriate. So what did the Florida DOE do? They expanded that to K through 8 before the legislature changed the law. And they also put in provisions to limit it in grades 9 through 12. So we see this first expansion happen. Same thing, 2022, 1467 passes. This is the book ban bill. Not a lot of people knew about it, but it passed, and it required that a certified media specialist approve every new purchase and every book that is in the library, and that in K through 5, every book in a school library has to be available to the public so that anyone in the district can challenge the book. The Florida DOE expanded the definition of a school library to include classroom libraries. And a classroom library is usually something that a teacher provides out of their own pocket, or there's donations from parents, or they apply for grants to fund their classroom libraries. These are not managed by the school district in most cases. So what happened in January of 2023, after the Florida Department of Education expanded that law, they went ahead and school districts were saying, we've got to close our classroom libraries. We have to have these entire collections cataloged in K through 5, which some classrooms have thousands of books because they're little short readers, early readers. And then we have to make sure that a certified media specialist has approved every single one of these books. So my two sons, who are here in Orange County, they were in 2nd and 5th grade last year. They should have very rich classroom environments full of books, inspiring them to learn and have ready access to books when they're finishing on time. Because there's a lot of kids in a classroom, they don't always finish their work on time. And the easiest thing a teacher can do is say, go to the library, right over there, go to the shelf, grab a book. That's what they had done for all the years prior. And last year, neither one of them had classroom libraries. Now, Orange County did spend over $400,000 in certified media specialist overtime in the summer before last school year, trying to get as many books approved. The problem is a teacher could lose their certification if a parent thinks that their teacher has made available information that is age or grade inappropriate. And that language is around sexual orientation and gender identity. But in HB 7, it's also there for anything regarding racism, discrimination, social justice, and this unsolicited theories. So, unsolicited theories has been used to encompass a lot of things. Not religion, but it's been used to encompass things like climate change. That's why this the start of this year, we saw the state approval process for science textbooks include revisions to textbooks that had too much information about climate change. Unsolicited theories has also been used to limit topics like social justice, topics like social emotional learning, topics like culturally responsive training or teaching. So there's a lot that unsolicited the Florida Department of Education has used to remove access to curriculum. The Equality Florida settlement It happened in March of this year. So if you remember, that was around HB 1557, which went into effect in July of 2022. So it took until March of this year for many, many districts to clarify that classroom instruction does not apply to libraries. And so we have been, every opportunity we had, making public comment, going to the meetings online for Florida Department of Education. We were sending letters. We got it into the press. We did everything we could to draw attention to the fact that a district like Charlotte County, which is in Southwest Florida, after 1557 expanded with 1069, they sent out a notice and said, we cannot have any characters or themes, LGBTQ plus characters or themes in our libraries. Not one. And they were removing books from K through 8, any representation whatsoever. We got it in the national press. We were doing everything we could. We asked the Florida Department of Education, please reach out to this district. It is your responsibility to ensure that they are accurately implementing the law, and they are not. They are censoring and discriminately censoring our libraries. They did not reach out, but March, they had to reach out. The part of the settlement agreement was clarifying that classroom instruction does not apply to libraries, not classroom libraries, and not the school libraries. So we should not see any more of that censorship happening, and when it does, we can point directly to that settlement now. So that wasn't the only lawsuit. We just recently had another settlement in Nassau County. The authors of And Tango Makes Three, I have a sample of it in the back. They filed a lawsuit in Nassau and said you did not follow your process when you removed our books. Again, Citizens Defending Freedom had sent an email to the district with about 30 books that they didn't like, and Tango Makes Three was one of them. They removed that book. They did not remove it because of content. They said that they removed it because of circulation. But the authors argued there are plenty of other books using our public records. There are plenty of other books that have lower circulation rates than And Tango Makes Three. And you removed our book, but you did not remove the other books. And so they argued that there was discrimination in their process, and they settled. And so most of those books went back to the shelves. Some of them they went back, but they're back under review. So now the district has committed to going through the review process. Another district, Alachua County, they were under the impression, because the state told them, that anything with any sexual conduct, depiction, or description could not be in the library. And they went ahead and thought, okay, if a book gets challenged and we see sexual conduct, a description of sexual assault in the book, and it's in our high schools, we still can't have it because that's what the state told us. And so they removed a bunch of books last year thinking they had to remove them. We pushed for clarification on the law. When the library media training updated this time, the FIRE, which is another First Amendment organization, they sent a letter to the state and they said, if you keep with this interpretation of the law that anything has to be removed, we will bring a lawsuit, because that's not what HB 1069 says. And so this summer they updated the library media training, and now Alachua has committed to re-reviewing all of the books that they had removed thinking they had to. So that was another big win for us. A majority of parents are choosing full access. I'm going to move to the next slide here. So these are just some of the counties. We have more than a dozen counties that have 100% access, and you'll be surprised. A lot of them are very red districts. But these are the districts that have kind of been in the news, right? Where we've seen a lot of challenges, whether Citrus happens to have their public libraries are removing books. But these are a lot of the districts that you see in the news, and you can see more than 99% of parents have provided full access when given the option. So this is not a movement of parents. This is a movement of far-right special interest groups trying to dictate what everybody else has access to and trying to redefine what is age appropriate. Where we are in the classrooms. So a lot of districts have done a lot of good work getting a lot of books approved for the classroom libraries. Some districts basically just said, if it's in our school library, you can have, and in your grades that you teach, you can have it available to your students. Others went through and approved entirely different lists. That's what Orange County did. Guidance on the laws has improved, but it's still inadequate. And again, we see Florida Department of Education failing to correct overcompliance. And that is a huge issue. The language is broad, the laws are punitive, the policy is punitive. And so when jobs are on the line, people tend to overcomply and they know it. And the state has a responsibility to fix that, and they are not. The big one right now is reproductive health and HIV/AIDS education. One of the things that HB 1069 did, they took away the local approval process. It used to be that every single district worked with their local health department to decide what needed to be in the curriculum to correct any needs or any information that students needed to know. Let's say there was, a particular disease that happened to be up in numbers, they could change the curriculum. Well, HB 1069 says, you can still develop your own curriculum, but we have to approve it. And then when it came for state approval, one, they didn't do it at all last year. So my son that was in 5th grade did not get puberty education last year because the state did not approve it. This year, this summer, they went to approval, and instead of the state putting in writing what needed to be updated and making it consistent, everything was given verbally. So there's no public records. And the Orlando Sentinel has done a good job talking to teachers off the record, getting the information about what has changed. But there's a lot that has come out. Topics of consent, domestic violence, they've been aged up. Certain things have been completely removed. So talking about contraception, you can name the types of contraception, but you can't discuss them. You can't inform students where to go get contraception. And the efficacy rates, all those sorts of things. There's a lot of information that has come out. Middle school civics standards. So my son is in 6th grade right now, learning world religion. World religion was updated, 6th grade world religion was updated so that students start to learn the Judeo-Christian tradition and its influence on our rule of law. 7th grade, it gets even more dicey from there. We're just starting to see what kinds of resources the state's making available. Both UCF through the Louvre Institute and FSU have been tasked, and they put out CPOM's information. They've been tasked to put out resources and guidance. It's there online. You can look it up. It's a little scary. But I do hope that more people start talking about it because, we're not yet putting 10 commandments on the walls or putting Bibles in the classroom. But this is the links that they're trying to make, especially at the 7th grade level. We started to put some up on our social media, but it is scary. And then the African American history standards, when they did update the social studies standards last May, we said, why aren't you updating these standards that, there was a huge outcry after you said, and the standards still say, that African Americans benefited from their enslavement, personally benefited from their enslavement. Why aren't you updating that standard? You have this opportunity to do that. And they said, we're not here to do that today. That's how they dismissed all the public comments at that Miami meeting. We're not here to update that today. We are here to do this. And coincidentally, they were there to update Asian American history standards, but they still managed to squeeze in Judeo-Christian tradition into the 6th grade standards. So this is the important part, where we want to be. We really want all districts to be committed to a fair and transparent process. Of those 700 books that the state reported removed, most of those did not get a public committee review process. In Clay County, there were nearly 300 books removed. I think 2 of them went through a committee review process. Outside of that, it was just district officials looking at the books, looking at the one person's objection form, not reading the books in their entirety, but looking at the objection form and thinking, do we want to keep this or not? The same thing goes in Manatee and Martin County. Their policy is actually that the principal gets to decide first. That happened in Volusia County too. Principal decided first. So all of the books that they reported as removals in those 3 counties, not one of them, committee review process. So we really want districts to be committed to a fair and transparent review process where the book is reviewed in its entirety. We need critical thinkers, right? We need to take into account all the information available to us. They should set the example. They should not be judging a book by its excerpt. We want policy that minimizes the impact of the objectors. So, Clay County, one person filed over 1,000 challenges and appeals since July of 2022. That shouldn't happen. They promised that HB 1285 was going to limit these people. The one person that's responsible for more than 250 objections in one county and nearly 60 in another county, she uses the power of attorney with parents to file it in a district that she doesn't even live in. So as long as they have a loophole that any parent can file as many objections as they want, you're still going to have people that get around it. So right now, the person in Clay County has found a parent the person responsible fills out all the forms, and then this parent can put their name on the form and turn them in. So it's slowing them down, but it still lets just a few voices have an insane amount of influence over an entire district. And then financial support for the expansion and diversification of our libraries. In Osceola County, let me start. The state removed categorical funding for our libraries. So now just a set amount of money goes to each district, and they can spend it as they choose on instructional materials and other needs. When each of our districts lost ESSER dollars, those federal dollars to recover from COVID, we lost that this year. A lot of districts, including Volusia County, were kind of looking at budgets that went into the red. And so now that there's not categorical funding set aside for our libraries, we're running into the issues where districts are budgeting that money elsewhere. So we're seeing less and less money going to our libraries at a time where they're now responsible for classroom libraries. And a lot of teachers are packing up their classroom libraries. So you'll have students in a school where one classroom has 1,000 books provided by a teacher approved by a classroom library, and just down the hall, no books. And that really shouldn't be acceptable, right? Every classroom should have at least a small library available to students that grows over time. So we would like to really see the state take on some sort of grant program where teachers that need the money to apply for classroom libraries can apply for the money, and then that we're having dedicated money for our libraries. Classrooms. The principles of professional conduct, that's the policy that I was talking about, where a teacher can have their certification threatened for not or for delivering age-inappropriate classroom instruction on certain topics. We need to change that. We need a burden of proof to be put into there. There should be some sort of standard. We need to define classroom instruction. It's not enough just to have the Equality Florida settlement. And then we really need to look at that policy and say, is this what we want? Where any one teacher could lose their livelihood over one parent's complaint. We need to repeal the historically inaccurate and offensive curriculum standards. I've kind of covered a lot of that, but it's just unacceptable where we are going. They are revising history, and our students need to, hopefully, they'll be able to leave here and able to compete in a very global world. And if our state has a completely different revisionist history that we're teaching, they are not going to be ready. And then local policy is important. So the change of HB 1069 and allowing the state to dictate what we're teaching, what curriculum we have available, that needs to go. We also need to make sure that teachers have the autonomy that they need to teach in the classroom. So I mentioned my son is in 6th grade world religion. They are currently in the process of learning about Judaism. And I have no problem about my kids learning about the different religions so long as they can recognize fact from belief. And the problem is the way that the curriculum lays it out. And I did not participate in the social studies adoption for this particular textbook, but I knew from teachers that the textbook that we adopted here was probably the best out of what was available to us. So I can't challenge the curriculum, but I need to make sure that the teacher feels comfortable having a discussion in the classroom to make sure that students can recognize fact from belief. And the hard thing is you're never going to please every parent in the classroom, right? When you're talking about this discussion. And so the discussion's just not happening, right? My son was assigned the textbook to read, the pages to read, and the assignment that came directly from the textbook, and that was it. And that's a problem. So we need a policy that's going to say, hey, parents, you have rights, but you have responsibilities. And you're going to get a syllabus at the start of the year. You need to communicate whatever you have your concerns about so that we know when these lessons are coming up, we're going to have a conversation with you. And you're going to tell me whether or not you want your child to be in the classroom when we have a discussion. And if you don't communicate that, you can't complain afterwards, because we're going to have a discussion about these topics because it's important. And I really think, there are some districts that have a policy somewhat like that in place since parental rights, but parents and teachers, they're trying to drive division between us. We know there's just a small number of parents that actually pose this threat where a teacher could lose their certification, but that threat is big enough that the conversation's ruining education for the rest of us. And so we need something in place that is really going to protect that. And here's where everybody comes into play. Okay, so this whole age-appropriate thing. We just want age-appropriate libraries. Well, who gets to define age-appropriate? Right now, it's the loudest person in the room gets to define what's age-appropriate. It's not our experts. It's not our education professionals. It's not a community coming together like it should be when things are called into question. And so we need to reject the attempt to redefine age-appropriate. Children need to have age-relevant materials available to them. If it's in their lives, it's something that they deserve to be able to seek out information about, right? So if they've got 2 moms or 2 dads, guess what? It's age-appropriate for them. And the library is 100% a choice between what you read and what you don't read, right? It's not captive audience reading. It's voluntary. And every child deserves to get served by their school library. Don't abandon the spaces where we can engage. This is a hard one post-election. A lot of us, I have, unfortunately, family members that don't live in Florida that voted for Trump. And it's hard to sometimes put yourself in the room with people. But if you are not somebody that is horribly impacted by these policies that have their rights trampled on, you are in a position where you can actually talk to somebody about this. There's a lot of misinformation, a lot of disinformation. It is hard to break through the noise. With the list, the 700, right? The Florida Department of Education responded to that list by saying, don't listen to them. They're far right or far left activists, and they're pushing, why are they pushing sexually explicit materials on our children? And, anyone that looked at that list, they would have seen Toni Morrison, they would have seen Alice Walker, they would have seen the book, Ban This Book, in Indian River County that's written for ages 8 to 12 that has no sexually explicit information in it whatsoever, right? So they do these tactics to get you just to shut everything else out and believe them. And it's tribal, and we need to get through to those people, not the people that are all the way out there that eat this stuff up, but the people that, oh yeah, we just want age-appropriate materials. That's all that people are doing. Those people we can talk to. And get them to understand, well, what do they mean by age appropriate? What are they taking out? And kind of break through those bubbles. So I think it's important when you're ready, when and if you're ready. And not everyone has to do it, but some of us do. Support the local groups, support Central Florida Freethought, support Florida Freedom to Read Project. Anyone that's really holding the line. We have a lot of great people that ran for office here in Central Florida. It is really hard. It's hard to put yourself out there. They make it intentionally hard to put yourself out there, right? By basically saying that I'm a sexual deviant for wanting to protect access to information, they seek to not just silence me, but silence everyone else around, right? Don't be the person that puts yourself out there. We're going to paint you as, And so make sure you're standing with people and not just letting somebody be out there alone. It's really hard. The state policies, we need to make sure that that what is happening what is happening in the moment gets challenged, right? We see things happen locally, and usually there's about 6 to 8 months ahead of bad policy locally where we could have taken action, and we can't be late on that. Right now, today, they're going to start announcing committees in Tallahassee. We need to pay attention to who gets nominated. And in Seminole County, there were a lot of Republicans that won by just a couple percentage points. If you're in Seminole County and these people represent you, make sure they hear your voice. Speak up about the things that you care about. Let them know that you're watching what they're going to be voting on. I would not be surprised to see something like a 10 Commandments being plastered in the classroom, or the Bible being put literally in the classroom. I wouldn't be surprised to see them go again, because they've tried it for the last 4 years, to update the definition of harmful to minors. So the same restrictions that we see in our school libraries will also impact our public libraries and what books are sold to minors. They want to get rid of the Miller test. And for the last 4 years, they've tried and they failed. It hasn't moved out of committee, but they will try again. So these are the things we have to pay attention to. Talk to your friends and neighbors about what they mean, because they put them in, like last year, the harmful to minors update, they put it in a bill that was labeled anti-pornography and protecting the children. And these things sound good and they're really hard to vote against, right? So it's very important that you're talking to your neighbors and your friends about what these policies actually seek to do. And then if and when bad policy becomes law, because it will, meet with school board members. We'd like to tell advocates, it's one thing to show up to school board meetings and speak out against something that they can control, but there's a lot of things that they can't control. Unfortunately, our districts have to assume that laws that pass in Tallahassee are constitutional until they're proven not in court. So they have to implement the laws, and if they don't, we know DeSantis will go ahead and just out duly elected officials and replace them with people that will implement the policies. So we will see bad policy become local policy, or bad law become local policy. But meeting one-on-one with them, we have the opportunity to really reduce a lot of harm. Letting them know we care about this, we're watching, even if you don't get to make the time, make the actual meeting, letting them know that you want to make a meeting and sending an email and conveying most of your thoughts there can make a huge difference. So, yes. And misinformation again, this is specific to book banning. So I said it before, they like to say it's not book banning if you can still buy it or get it online, or in the library. But schools are the great equalizer, right? Our schools are the opportunity for students to not only learn in the classroom, but to bring themselves out of poverty, and use resources that aren't usually available to them. So the school libraries are that opportunity to seek out additional learning beyond the classroom. And so it is book banning in a particular school when a book is restricted or removed. Because if there is a will, if there's a student want and desire to read it, and there's a parent who says, give my child full access, and there's a media specialist who would, if not for the law, have provided access to that book, it is a banned book. So that's how you get around that one. When they present an example of a book that they feel is inappropriate, defend a transparent and thorough objection process. You might feel uncomfortable defending every single book that's out there. But if we all agree to have the same process, to put every book through the same process, and to bring community members together to define for a particular school community, not an entire district, not an entire state, but for a particular school community, what is appropriate, then we have done the best that we can. We may not be able to save every book, but through a consistent process, we'll ensure that we're saving many, many books. Remind them that public schools must protect equal access. I said that before, but the libraries fill a huge gap for our students, and we need to develop lifelong readers. We're not right now. We're failing that. The literacy rates are terrible in the state. And really, there's a lot. I mean, I have both kids spent way too much time this morning on iPads. But there's a lot for, trying to grab their attention and slowing down and reading a book. Really, I loved it yesterday. I took my oldest son and a friend out to Disney, and we were talking in the car. She was talking about her favorite book and how great it is to think of what these characters look like and develop, use their imaginations at the same time. And she's like, "You're going to cry when you get to this one part, Logan. It's going to be great." And so, they do find an appreciation for it when you give them the space and the opportunity, and when you give them the opportunity to connect and find the books that they like, the books that are written for them at this age, not the books that we're comfortable with, but the books that meet them where they are. And so let's speak up for that. So that's the presentation, but I really want to open it up for questions, and I hope you have a lot of them.
Okay, questions?
You mentioned the Miller test. I'm not familiar with that. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I was wondering if I actually said it or not. It was one of those things I said quickly. Yes, the Miller test comes from a Supreme Court case back in, I believe, 1960s, 70s. But it's the three-pronged test to decide whether or not something is obscene. And it's what the courts use. So the first one is that, does the book meet the community standards? And I say book, but it's actually any creative work. The second one, does it appeal to prurient interests? So is it only written for arousal? The third is, when judged in its entirety, does it hold literary, there's a bunch of them, literary, artistic, political value. So does it hold value for the reader, the viewer? And that Miller test is actually, it frames Florida's definition of harmful to minors. So we had the exact same thing. The only difference is when you're talking about community standards, you're talking about the community standards for minors. And so, one of we've had this provision for a while in Florida education. When they're selecting books, they have to decide if it's pornographic or harmful to minors. It shouldn't be in our libraries. They shouldn't have purchased. That was there before all of these laws were in place. The problem is, harmful to minors is a high standard, right? You can't just say a book, and I have it back there like Speak, where it's semi-autobiographical. Lori Halls Anderson writes about a ninth grader who, going into her ninth grade year, experiences a sexual assault at a party. And the entire book, she basically remains silent. She doesn't tell her parents. She doesn't have the words to speak out to anybody. She loses friends over her change in behavior. She goes through depression. And at the very end of the book, she confronts her abuser, who's also in her high school and in one of her classes. And so she has a brief description of it. It's not overly explicit. It's not meant to arouse, that's for sure. But this book has been removed. It appears on the state's list. And it's not harmful to minors, right? And it doesn't appeal to prurient interests. But you have to read a book in its entirety, because somebody's going to come up and read that excerpt. And if you had read the book, you would never put the inflections where they put the inflections, right? You would never read it in the tone that these people read this book out loud. But they misrepresent the work. And so the Miller test is used as a court standard for a reason. It protects, or it distinguishes what is protected speech from what is obscenity. And that same test is in our harmful to minors definition. And that's why we had the committee review process, because we review a work in its entirety with a community representative, or with a group representative of the community, and decide whether or not it holds literary value for our students.
Thank you. I just hope. I just wanted to say, I'm frustrated and angry that they're doing this. But then I thought, my kids are grown. What can I do? And then I realized there are people, a friend of mine, Autumn Hupp, who ran for the school board in Seminole County, and her kids are grown and in college. And so, can you speak to that on what I can do?
Yeah. So one, we all have, they like to say it, everyone has taxpayer dollars that go into our schools, and our communities, especially our public schools, make a successful community, right? Every successful community has a great public school at the heart of it. And so you have every right to speak out at our school board meetings, to write our school board members, to run for school board. And that's where this whole parental rights puts the wrong emphasis on things. We can't assume that every parent, I'll be honest, there are certain districts where they do parent opt-ins versus opt-outs. And Collier County was one of them last year. And by December of last school year, there were still 30% of parents that hadn't turned in a form. So not every parent is involved paying attention and making sure that their kid has exactly what they need. And that's the unfortunate part of it. And so, everyone deserves a say. Our educators need a seat at the table, our parents need a seat at the table, and communities need a seat at the table, and community members. So you have every right to speak up, and please speak up and get connected. Some of the groups, I happen to have started the group as a parent, but we support local groups. And so if you're from Volusia County, there's Citizens for Truth and Justice in Education, started by retirees. Education Champions in Indian River County, they managed through their advocacy, they protected 2 school board seats. And they made sure Moms for Liberty and the DeSantis sponsored school board candidates lost those seats. And they're retirees. The Purple Group in Lee County, retired teachers. So there are a lot of retirees that are really getting involved and speaking up, recognizing that this whole movement, this is one piece of the puzzle. The whole movement, though, the parental rights movement, is to build distrust in public education. It came just before they passed universal vouchers. That is not a coincidence. And they are going to continue to use this, build it, you can't trust what's in your school. You can't trust your teachers. Parents need options to pass universal vouchers nationwide. That's the goal. That's ultimately the goal, is to move taxpayer money to for-profit education that has no accountability whatsoever. And that's a huge issue for you as citizens, whether or not you have kids in the schools or not.
Thank you. No, I just want to say thank you, because if I can go to a group of people that are already doing similar and help them, that's a great way to get. Okay. Hey.
My other question was pretty similar to that. As somebody who would have children and may have even been told you're not a parent, you wouldn't understand.
What advice do you have to get past that mindset?
Sure. Well, I will say this. There are a lot of people that may not be parents physically, but are parents and nurture the lives of young people, right? We have a lot of educators. I have a lot of important siblings that are aunts and uncles without kids of their own, right? And so it takes a village. You are part of that village. I will say also, if you're not comfortable advocating in schools, our public libraries are going to need it too. And so there are library boards that you can, in certain areas, you can volunteer and to get yourself appointed to the library boards. There are committees where they too have to review materials that are being challenged in their libraries. They'll need people for that. Certain school districts will look for community members who are not parents to serve. So if you're part of an organization, especially if you have any social work experience, they'll often look for people to participate. I know Polk County is one of them, where when they do have their committees, they're usually pretty large, and they try to invite in nurses, social workers, psychologists to be a part of the committee review process too. She's bringing a mic to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wonder how have private schools dealt with this trend?
So private schools actually don't have to remove anything.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. We did a couple of distribution events at the start of the school year before the 22-23 school year. And we had somebody who teaches at a Montessori school. And this is something else that's pretty interesting. There's about, there's over 90% of our public schools have libraries in the state of Florida, but I think it's below 70% of private schools. And so we actually had private school teachers reach out to us and said, because this was only open to educators at the time that we were doing this distribution. And they said, can we come and get books? Because we don't have any books either. And they said, we don't even have to be picky about the books that we take because we don't have any of those rules. And so this distribution happened to have a lot of LGBTQ plus books about social justice. and well, this teacher from a Montessori school took one of everyone. But it's they don't have to do any of the things that we're doing, and now they can also get vouchers for their students that are enrolled. So they can get $9,000 of your tax dollars and not be accountable to the same laws.
But the parents haven't done anything in the private schools. They haven't been vocal.
So, there are private schools that are particular beliefs that'll say we'll never have those books in our schools. And that's, those parents that are likely to complain are probably going to those schools.
Hi, I'm Marcel. I'm from the Netherlands, so I look at things very liberally. And my experience is that young kids, when they see things, they will just filter straight over it, not even recognize, because they don't at that point that they would even think that that's something for them. What I am worried about, of course, if the wrong idea about sexual obscenities is used, adults misusing children as an example. But what I am, and that goes into the category of violence with me, I'd like to know what standards we have about books or other material media with violence when it comes to the government.
So again, it can fall into that Miller test, right? So when you're talking about the community standards, take for instance, the book Sold. The book Sold is the author went to Nepal, India, Afghanistan, and she met and spoke with a number of people that were forced into sex work. And she created characters from these stories. And the book Sold was available in many districts at the high school level in libraries because it is based on true accounts, and it is important for young people, especially young girls who happen to make up the largest population of sexually abused demographics, to understand the language, to be able to recognize when they might be, being groomed for that. And so this book was in our libraries. And it does appear, it's one of the books that appears on the AP Literature exam. So they like to say that this book robs students and young people of their innocence because they're reading about these terrible, horrible things, and that it can also promote such sexual violence because this information exists. And it could inspire ideas. The objector in Clay County with the book The Handmaid's Tale wrote that it was anti-male and that it also could cause men to believe these things, that they should seek this out. And in a lot of ways, you see that too with the anti-racism, where they talk about books that discuss social justice can actually promote racism because it talks about, they use the words that were used in the 1950s and 60s, and they're teaching our kids about these things. So they twist it. And again, it goes back to the important thing is that we review the work in its entirety. When Sold went up to the school board, and the school board had to review it, I think this was 2 school years ago, 22-23, but in the spring. One school board member thought that she was going to vote to remove the book, and then she read it. And she spoke up and she said, I'm the only school board member that has a 15-year-old. And I finished reading that book, and I handed that book to my 15-year-old and said, you need to read this book. Because although it made me uncomfortable, these are things that she needed to know about because she's going to go off to college and I'm not going to be able to protect her. And you don't protect innocence with ignorance. You just don't. You can't. And these books act as cautionary tales. So while they can, like I said, I'm a mom of young kids. The first book that I went up to bat for was not a book that I ever would have thought to read, and not a book that I would ever hand to my kids at 9 and 11. There's a time when that book is appropriate. It wasn't then, but I also was not ready to just let a book go based off of one excerpt that was chosen by somebody that I definitely don't trust. And so again, when you're dealing with those sorts of situations where you're not sure, there's the author of Fight Club. A lot of his books have come under review, and he does write, somewhat violent books, as well as Stephen King, a horror writer, right? There is a time and a place for those types of books. These are voluntary books, and at a certain age. In high school, you're trying, you want them to grab the book and not go on the internet. I think something that's really kind of ironic about this whole movement of theirs, they started a book report website. So they take all of these excerpts that they have found and they create these little book reports, and you can download them very easily off their website. And they sit here and they talk about how we're trying to push and make available this information to our students. These are in school libraries where they, in order to get to the one passage in The Bluest Eye that they really object to, they'd have to read, I think, 200 or 300 pages. Parents can set limits, right? So you have all of these opportunities to set your own boundaries and borders, and a student really has to work to get to this information that they think is so terrible. But then they go and post it online, and they put it up in social media so that all you have to do is Google search the name of the book and you immediately see the images that they don't want you to see. It makes no sense. It makes no sense. And so, yeah, the best thing that we can do is defend a process that considers the work in its entirety, and we discuss it in person, and cooler heads prevail.
Thank you. So, segueing off that question, and as you play Freud a little bit, given your comprehensive knowledge of the books that have been banned, I'm not going to affect quotes, bacon, what are they obsessed with? What do they actually care about? It isn't up the well-being of children, but what do they actually care about? What are they assessing? What would go wrong?
Right. And again, they want to say that they truly believe to protect innocence, you have to keep them from this information. And that's just you'll never see eye to eye with those people, right? That you can create a bubble for your child, and then magically at 18, when they graduate from high school and go off into the world, you can pop that bubble and they will be perfectly, ready for the world. I
think it's a money scheme, just like now we're getting recreational marijuana. Finally, it's a money scheme. When the rich people can make money on it, then they will allow it. I'm sorry to say that.
Well, again, it goes back to what the larger movement is. So when they say protect the children, they can say protect them from who? Protect them from the educators that want to, want to instill values and beliefs that are not yours as a parent, right? When they say protect the children, they can say, our public schools are failing our children. No one's looking out for their best interests the way that a parent can. And so it's the bigger scheme of really wanting to move. They want to privatize education, and leave what's available in our public schools, dismal, unfortunately. And so those that you only get $8,000 to $9,000 right now in the state if you apply for the voucher, right? $8,000 to $9,000 isn't going to get you into the best school. It's not going to cover the best private school. It's no guarantee that you're going to end up in that private school, right? Even the school that you want, oh, there's this great school. They've got 30 kids that they can get into the classroom in your grade. You think if this school is so great, you're not going to be the only parent in the community wanting to get their kid in that school, right? So as our schools start to fail and parents that have the means take the voucher and supplement their now for-profit education, then you have our schools still there. They're starting to close. So now you don't have the school right down the street. You've got to drive 30 minutes to your school to get your kid to and from where they need to go. You're going to lose teachers, great teachers, because you've got these horrible policies in place where, it really limits what can be taught in the classroom and how the teacher autonomy, the different tactics and things that you can use to reach the different students. And so it's just part of a bigger movement, unfortunately. The Daily Show should be doing a feature soon. I know that they recorded him on the book Objector and Clay, and he's just a unique person. He actually wrote an email to the district back in July saying, I took a break from reading the pornography in your schools for a month, and man, does my head feel better. I cannot understand this man, but he insists that child services should be called on me. So I can't think too much about those people, but I think a majority of the people that voted for the policies but aren't that person really think that it's just about that whole age-appropriate thing, and that we can all agree on what's age-appropriate, and then they don't take the time to look at the list.
Another question? Do you
do thinking outside of just elementary education? Because I see this percolating up to our community colleges. They can't teach now about diversity.
Right.
Our society is being impacted by the let's protect everybody from learning everything. Because if you give me something that I don't agree with, that's a challenge to have the discussion, to educate me.
Right.
And it seems like this is percolating up even into our higher ed.
Oh, yeah. So it's easy for us to focus on K-12 because that's where our kids are. But yes, we do focus, or we do watch the bills that are going to impact higher ed. We do work with groups that are specifically, especially there's a lot of youth advocacy groups that are in college and do that work. And so we help support as best that we can. We don't file as many public records there. But there are Penn Florida, so it's Penn America, but in the Florida office, they're working hard on the limits in higher education as well. And I will say this whole narrative of indoctrination, well, indoctrination is when you limit access to information and service to a particular narrative. And exactly what they're doing, where they're telling adults in our higher education system, I don't care if you want to pay to learn sociology. We're not going to teach it anymore. And they're picking and choosing what they're going to teach. And then in regards to teachers and what new teachers are able to learn, they have taken out a lot of the social emotional learning, a lot of the culturally responsive teaching, not the other CRT, that our teachers were able to get before. And so it is going to have a huge impact, not just those seeking higher ed degrees, but when you're limiting what they're taught so that they, when they go out into the classroom, don't have the information that they need to really reach and teach all of our kids, that's going to be a huge issue. So yes, it is a focus. It is a focus of ours. Not a primary focus, but it's there.
Any other questions? I have a final question. When we're thinking about the books that could be banned and we're talking about reading excerpts, has anybody ever done that with the Bible?
Yes. Yes. So There are a number of districts where somebody has come and read aloud during open non-agenda public comment and read from Songs of Solomon, and then after reading or Ezekiel, I think is another one, right? Yeah. So they read that and then they say, do you know what book this is? And then they say the Bible, right? And we have one back there, what to say if you're going to speak at a school board meeting. And that's one of the things that you can do is you can pick an excerpt. Another one that you can do is like find a really generic kids book. There's one that I think the example, it's like Run Bunny Run or something like that. And there's just something about like being blown, but they're not talking about that, right? But like if you could pick a kid's book and read something like that out of context. But people have tried to challenge the Bible in Florida. Here's the thing. Statute 1003.45 protects morning meditation, and it makes it a required thing that must happen in all K through 12 education, and all K through 12 public classrooms. And it states in that statute, teachers should make available religious text like the Bible in the event that a student would like to use it during this time. And so because that statute exists and because there are standards like world religion, where they do learn about, 6th grade world religion requires that they learn about Judaism, Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, not Islam. So that's really interesting too. But because there's standards like that, and because there's ELA standards where the best standards, they include the book of Esther, and there's one other one in 11th or 12th grade. So because it's peppered throughout, the districts have all declined to take it through objection. There was one district, Palm Beach, that initially, and actually Volusia initially said that it would, and then Volusia has just said, oh, nope. They saw what the other districts did, and they said, yeah, we're gonna point to 1003.45 and say we can't take the Bible out. And then Palm Beach did take it through, but they didn't review it in its entirety. They basically just said, no, we're required to keep it. So it has been done. We don't advise to do it because those reasons, but also because then they can say, Governor DeSantis likes to get up and say, there's challenges from both the left and the right. And, we know exactly what that means, and they're pointing to those objections to the Bible. And so, in order to not have that talking point for him, we would prefer, we're not going to object to anything. We're just going to fight for a fair process.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh, freedom from religion.